wisdom. In Buddhism, we must be very careful to understand what wisdom truly means, for it differs markedly from what the world calls wisdom. When people speak of worldly wisdom, they generally mean good judgment or knowledge gained through study and rational thought. But in Buddhism, wisdom, or panya, points to something far deeper. It is a faculty of mind that penetrates directly into the truth of things. This wisdom doesn't arise through mere thinking or intellectual understanding. Rather, it emerges from a mind that has been properly trained and made peaceful through meditation practice. When the mind becomes still and concentrated, it develops a special quality of knowing that's quite different from ordinary understanding. This knowing has a brightness to it, a clarity that brings joy and contentment. It's not the restless activity of thoughts jumping from one idea to another, but a steady, penetrating light that illuminates the truth of whatever it examines. Many people find themselves caught in the trap of believing that by thinking more, they'll comprehend more. But thinking alone cannot lead to true wisdom. Think of it this way. If you're stirring a bucket of muddy water, the water only becomes more turbid. But if you let the bucket remain still, the mud gradually settles to the bottom, and the water becomes clear. Similarly, when we let the mind become still through samadhi meditation, true clarity emerges naturally. The development of wisdom requires a proper foundation to work. Just as you wouldn't try to build a house without first preparing the ground, you shouldn't attempt to develop wisdom without first establishing strong mindfulness and concentration. These qualities create the necessary conditions for wisdom to arise. Mindfulness keeps the mind steady and alert, while concentration provides the stability and power needed for deep investigation. Some people may have what appears to be natural wisdom, but without proper training, this wisdom remains superficial. It's like having a sharp knife, but not knowing how to use it properly. You might cut yourself instead of achieving your purpose. This is why the Buddha emphasized the importance of systematic training, starting with the cultivation of sila, or moral conduct, leading to samadhi, and culminating in wisdom. When we begin the practice of wisdom development, we start with what's most obvious: the physical body. This isn't arbitrary. It's a carefully chosen starting point. The body serves as an excellent object for beginning wisdom practice because it's tangible and readily apparent to our experience. We can see it, feel it, and investigate its nature directly. When we examine the body carefully, we begin to see it differently from how we usually perceive it. We start to understand its true characteristics, its impermanence, its unsatisfactoriness, and its lack of self-identity. As you progress in your investigation, you move from the gross to the subtle, following the path that the Buddha laid out in the 4 foundations of mindfulness, or satipatthana. This progression is natural and necessary. You begin with the body, kayanupassana, which is most apparent. Then you move to feelings, vedananupassana, which are more subtle but still readily observable. From there, you progress to investigating the mind itself, cittanupassana, and finally to the most subtle aspects of your experience, mental phenomena, dhammanupassana. This systematic progression serves a crucial purpose. By starting with what's obvious and gradually moving to what's subtle, you develop your wisdom faculty in a balanced and thorough way. It's like learning to read. You start with the alphabet before moving on to words, then sentences, and finally complete texts. Each stage builds upon the previous one, creating a solid foundation for deeper understanding. When you examine the 4 foundations of mindfulness, you must understand that their purpose goes far beyond mere mindful awareness. Their true aim is to systematically untangle the knots of attachment that bind you to the endless cycle of birth and death. This is not a theoretical exercise, but a practical method that works directly with your experience. One of the most important insights we gain through this practice is understanding what we are not. This might seem counterintuitive. Surely we want to know what we are. But the Buddha's methods often work by elimination. By clearly seeing what we are not, we gradually come closer to understanding what we are. This is particularly evident when investigating the physical body. Through careful contemplation, we begin to see that this body, which you've identified with so strongly, isn't actually what you are. It's just one aspect of your experience, a temporary dwelling place rather than your true identity. The development of wisdom through this method brings about a profound transformation in how you understand yourself and the world. It's not just about accumulating knowledge or developing clever ideas. Instead, it's about seeing deeply into the nature of experience. This seeing has a different quality from intellectual understanding. It carries with it a sense of certainty and a taste of liberation. When you truly see something through wisdom, that seeing changes you. It's not just a notion you can argue about. It's a truth you've verified through your own personal experience. This is why the Buddha emphasized the importance of direct knowing over mere belief or intellectual understanding. True wisdom isn't something you can get from books or discussions, though these can point us in the right direction. It must arise from your own practice, your own investigation, and your own direct seeing. This is the path of wisdom that leads to genuine freedom and the end of all suffering. Let us begin with the physical body, for it is here that most people are firmly attached. The body serves as your first foundation, your initial foothold in the practice. When you look at the body, you can see it quite clearly as part of the material world. It's composed of the same elements you find in the earth, the water, and the air around you. You feed the body with food grown from the soil, and when life departs, the body returns to those basic elements. This much is obvious to anyone who contemplates deeply. When you begin to investigate the body with mindfulness, you must start from what is plainly observable. Look at this body sitting here. What do you find? Flesh, bones, skin. These are not abstract concepts, but immediate realities that you can verify through insight. Consider carefully. This physical form that you call body is composed of the basic elements found throughout nature. The calcium in your bones is no different from the calcium in limestone. The water in your blood is the same water that falls as rain. The heat in your body is borrowed from your environment. When you eat, the body transforms matter from the external world into flesh and energy. Is there anything there you can truly call your own? When death comes, as it surely will come, this borrowed matter simply returns to its source. The body decays, and its elements disperse back into the earth, water, fire, and air from which they came. Look at a corpse. Really look at it. That, too, was once a living body like yours. What's the essential difference? Both are collections of elements that follow natural laws. But there's something quite unique about the body, because you know it in two distinct ways. You know it externally, as an object in the world, but you also know it internally, through direct experience. This internal knowing is where your practice must begin, for it's here that your attachments are rooted. When the Buddha speaks of establishing mindfulness inside the body, he's not speaking metaphorically. You must literally place your attention within the body's mass. This teaching is not merely wise advice. It's a practical instruction. As you maintain this internal attention, something quite remarkable begins to happen. You discover that your knowledge of the body comes almost entirely through feelings and sensations. Although you cling to this body fiercely, claiming, "This is me, this is mine," how do you actually experience your body? This is a crucial point that requires careful investigation. When you feel an itch or a pain, where exactly does that sensation appear? You may say, "My leg hurts," but what is actually experiencing that pain? Modern science tells us the brain maps the entire body, creating a complete neural representation of it. But go deeper and ask, what is aware of these neural patterns? The mind creates a subtle body of feeling that overlays the physical form, like a complex image projected into a physical frame. This is what you really experience, not the physical body itself, but this mind-made phantom. This discovery marks a crucial transition in your practice. The solid, material body that you've always taken yourself to be begins to dissolve into a body of feeling and sensation. This is not immediately apparent to most practitioners. They continue to think they're investigating a physical body, when in fact they're already working with something far more subtle, the feeling body. When you feel pain in your foot, the actual experience is happening in this subtle body of feeling, which is projected onto the physical location you label foot. The physical nerves transmit only signals. The experience of pain arises in the mind's representation of the body. This is not some scientific theory. You can observe this happening clearly in your own practice. Here, you see how body and feeling are inextricably linked in your experience. You cannot separate physical sensations from the mental impressions. They arise together as one process. And underlying all of this is mindful awareness, the knowing element that is aware of both body and feeling. So, watch carefully how thoughts and mental states color and condition your whole bodily experience. When the mind is agitated, physical sensations become rough and unpleasant. When the mind is calm and concentrated, the body feels light and at ease. This shows how mindful awareness pervades and shapes your entire experience of having a body. This investigation leads you to a profound insight. What we take to be a solid, independent self inhabiting a physical form is actually a dynamic process of interdependent parts, both physical and mental, gross and subtle, all working together. None of these qualities belong to you. They simply follow their inherent nature. By contemplating the body in this way, starting from the gross physical form and penetrating through to its subtle mental dimensions, you begin to loosen your attachment to this borrowed collection of disparate elements. It is here that the path to freedom from pain begins. This internal knowing of the body proves absolutely essential for breaking your attachment to it. When you maintain attention inside the body, really dwelling within it, rather than thinking about it, an interesting shift occurs. You begin to notice that your entire knowledge of the body comes through feeling and sensation. As this shift occurs, your attachment to the gross physical body naturally begins to weaken. But be careful here. This is not the end of attachment, merely its migration to a more refined object. You will typically transfer your sense of identity from the physical body to this more subtle body of feeling. This is progress, certainly, but it's just at the beginning stage. When mindfulness becomes firmly established in this internal realm of feeling, another layer of understanding emerges. You begin to see clearly how your mental states shape and define your entire experience of feeling. This is a profound revelation. Take pain, for example. The physical sensation might be quite minimal, but your mental state can amplify it into something unbearable. Or consider pleasure. The same physical sensation can be experienced as delightful, or sometimes disturbing, depending entirely on your mental state. This understanding leads you to a startling conclusion. The mind is not merely interpreting feelings, it is their very foundation. This realization naturally draws your attention deeper, toward the mind itself. As this happens, feelings that once seemed so central to your identity begin to appear more peripheral, more external. Your practice naturally evolves toward contemplation of mental states. The workings of the mind are intricate, yet they can be understood through careful investigation. When we look deeply, you find that the mind operates through various factors working in concert. There are feelings, the basic sensing of pleasure, pain, and indifference, and there are memories of past experiences. But the most important factors for your investigation are sankharas and dhammas, which together form the basis of all thought and mental activity. Let us examine sankharas first. These are the active forces in the mind, the mental formations that create and combine to produce our thoughts and ideas. Think of them as the building blocks that come together to create mental states. When you experience anxiety, for instance, this isn't one simple idea. It's a combination of various sankharas working together. The same is true for states like anger, conceit, compassion, and concentration. Each of these states is actually a complex arrangement of different mental factors. In meditation practice, particularly when establishing mindfulness of mental states, you begin to see how these combinations of sankharas arise and cease. You observe how they interact with your bodily experiences and your feelings. This observation is more than just a hypothesis. It's something you can witness occurring in your own mind during meditation. With mindfulness firmly established in the domain of mental states, you will begin to perceive something even more refined, the subtle phenomena that constitute the mind's contents. These mental phenomena, or dhammas, are extraordinarily quick and elusive, far more so than the gross mental states you first encountered. They represent an even more internal aspect of your experience. The fourth foundation of mindfulness is where the practice becomes most challenging, for these subtle phenomena are the final frontier of your attachment. They are so close to you, so intimately yours, that seeing them clearly requires extraordinary levels of mindfulness and wisdom. The Dhammas are the basic elements of mind that cannot be broken down further. They are like the fundamental particles of mental experience. When you encounter pure greed or pure hatred, you're dealing with Dhammas. They simply appear in the mind as they are, complete and indivisible. You can't break down greed into smaller components because it's already at its most basic level. The relationship between sankharas and dhammas is crucial to understand. The dhammas are the raw materials, while the sankharas are the combinations and formations created from these raw materials. Their interaction is similar to how basic chemical elements combine to form complex molecules. Every mental state you experience is ultimately made up of these fundamental dhammas, arranged in various patterns by the actions of sankharas. When you practice mindfulness of dhammas, you're investigating the most subtle aspect of your experience. This investigation reveals the fundamental laws governing all experience, laws like impermanence and causality. Nothing in the mind stays the same. Everything exists in constant flux. The four foundations of mindfulness: body, feelings, mind states, and dhammas are not separate territories, but rather different aspects of the same experience. When you're truly mindful, you'll notice that all four foundations are present in every moment. You can't have a bodily experience without feeling, without a state of mind, or without the basic mental factors that make up that experience. As your practice deepens, you naturally progress from gross to subtle. You start with the body because it's tangible and relatively easy to observe. Then you move to feelings, which are more subtle, but still quite noticeable. Mind states require even more refined attention. And finally, the investigation of dhammas demands the most subtle and penetrating awareness. As you progress through these increasingly subtle layers of experience, you encounter a peculiar paradox. Everything seems to be internal. This raises a profound question. If everything is internal, what could external possibly mean? The deeper you go with this practice, the more you realize the internal aspect of everything you're investigating. The traditional teachings speak of contemplating phenomena internally and externally. But at what point does this separation occur? This is not some philosophical question. It's a practical dilemma that arises in advanced practice. In my experience, this apparent paradox resolves itself only at the most refined levels of meditation, where the very notions of inner and outer lose their meaning entirely. The resolution of this paradox comes not through intellectual analysis, but through direct investigation. As you probe deeper, you begin to see that the very notion of internal and external is part of our fundamental delusion about the mind. Eventually, these concepts become meaningless at the subtlest levels of practice. The progression through the four foundations of mindfulness isn't just about moving from coarse to refined. It's fundamentally about developing increasingly clear insight. As your mindfulness becomes more established, concentration naturally deepens, and wisdom begins to emerge. You start to see things as they really are, not as you imagine them to be. This seeing leads to a natural letting go. You don't have to force yourself to give up attachments, because when you truly see the nature of what you're holding on to, attachment to it falls away by itself. Just as your hand would naturally drop a hot coal once you clearly recognize that it's burning you. As your mindfulness deepens, something even more fascinating comes to light. You start to see how your mental states color and shape your entire experience of bodily feelings. A peaceful mind experiences the body one way, an agitated mind another way altogether. This reveals a profound truth. The mind itself is the master of feeling. When this insight really sinks in, those feelings that seemed so personal, so much a part of you, begin to appear more distant, more external. Your attention then intuitively shifts to investigating the mind itself. With mindfulness now firmly established in watching mental states, you can begin to discern the extremely subtle mental phenomena that give rise to those states. These are far more refined than the more obvious states of mind you're used to noting. They require extremely sharp attention to perceive clearly. Yet it's precisely these subtle mental phenomena that you must understand and release if you're to find true freedom. To penetrate to these depths requires wisdom of an exceptionally sharp and penetrating nature. This isn't the wisdom of books or logical reasoning. It's the wisdom born of direct seeing. Although you might thoroughly understand the theory that the body is not self, you still habitually relate to your body as though it were self. Real wisdom is different. It's like stepping back and seeing the body with fresh eyes, as if for the first time. When genuine wisdom arises, there's an immediate, unmistakable knowing. This body is not me, not mine, not myself. This knowing starts with the gross aspects of the body and methodically works inward, examining and releasing attachment at progressively subtler levels, until no trace of identification remains. The beauty of this practice is that it's entirely practical. You don't need to accept anything on faith. Instead, you investigate directly, seeing for yourself how attachment operates and how it can be understood and released through careful, systematic practice. The ordinary thinking mind flits about like a butterfly, never settling for long on any single object. But wisdom, that's altogether different. When wisdom arises, the mind becomes still and totally centered. It doesn't merely glance at a meditation object. It penetrates right into its heart, seeing layer upon layer of truth without the slightest wavering or doubt. What happens when wisdom is in charge is different from discovering something entirely new. It's like you've been looking at something familiar all your life, when suddenly one day you see it with completely fresh eyes, see right through to its true nature. The understanding comes from such a deep place that there's no hint of deception. The truth hits you with so much force that you wonder how you could have missed it all that time. The thinking mind never reaches these depths. In fact, thinking actually creates a kind of fog that obscures wisdom. It's like trying to see the bottom of a pond while stirring up the mud. That's why we train the mind to become quiet and steady in meditation. When wisdom arises, it's not just a brief flash of insight. It's more like a bright lamp that stays lit for a period of time, illuminating everything within its reach with extraordinary clarity. During such times, you might look at your own body and see right through its outer appearance to its fundamental nature. The understanding is so clear and obvious that you might find yourself looking at others, thinking, surely they must see this too. But of course they can't, because their minds aren't in that same state of wisdom. It's like having your eyes suddenly opened while those around you are still asleep. This state of sustained, penetrative wisdom is what we're working towards in our practice. We're not seeking book learning or mental reflections, though these do have their place in the beginning stages. We're seeking the kind of wisdom that arises from training the mind through meditation. This wisdom doesn't just know facts, it sees connections, patterns, and relationships across many levels of reality, all at once. Take the practice of satipatthana, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Each domain must be explored thoroughly, like a doctor examining a patient from every angle. You investigate the body, feelings, mind, and mental objects until you understand how they work together, how they influence each other. Then wisdom begins to spot the universal patterns, the way all these things are constantly changing, how they're always unsatisfactory, how they're empty of any lasting essence. When wisdom really sees these truths, disenchantment inevitably follows. You don't have to force it. The clear seeing itself leads to letting go. As wisdom deepens, it gradually burns away all attachments, until the mind eventually becomes pure and free, like a caged bird released from captivity to fly freely.